Apartment 2E was my escape until it made me remember who I really was. Reddit drama story. They told me apartment 2E had been empty since the fire. Not the kind that left a place in ashes, but the slow kind. Smoke crawling through walls, alarms failing, someone forgetting a lit cigarette on the balcony while the wind did the rest. I didn't ask many questions when I moved in. It was cheap, and after everything I'd gone through last year, cheap felt like a miracle. The building stood on the edge of the old quarter, with ivy climbing halfway up its bricks and iron balconies that screeched in the wind like someone whispering from another world. The hallways were long and dim, the kind of place where time didn't walk so much as it hung in the air like cobwebs. There was a woman across the hall who always wore gloves, even indoor in summer. She never smiled. A man on the first floor who stared too long at everyone's shoes. No one made noise. No one knocked. And 2E. It was like the building itself didn't want to remember it. The door was newly painted, but the handle was older than the rest, worn, cold, and scratched. The key turned easily, but the hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in years. The floor inside had been redone, probably to cover scorch marks, but the corners still held the scent of smoke when the air got too still. I didn't care. I wanted quiet. After what happened with Lena, I needed a place where my phone didn't buzz with her name, where her perfume didn't linger on my sheets, where I could pretend I wasn't the villain in someone else's story. 2E was a blank slate. Or so I thought. The first week passed in silence, mostly. I unpacked slowly, filling shelves with books I hadn't touched in years, setting up my desk by the window where the afternoon sun filtered through cracked blinds. The neighbors didn't say much, and I didn't push. There was something about the air in that building, like everyone had made a pact not to speak more than necessary. The only sounds were the creaks of floorboards overhead, the faint hum of an old fridge, the clink of radiators rediscovering life. But on the seventh night, something changed. I woke at 3:12 a.m., the clock glowing red like an omen. My apartment was dark, the silence absolute, and yet I was sure I'd heard something. A thud, a soft shuffle. Then nothing. I sat up, heart ticking faster, and stared at the door. No shadows, no motion, just that eerie feeling that you weren't alone. I laughed it off. New apartment nerves. But the next night it happened again. And again. Always between 3 and 3:30, a creak near the window. The sound of something brushing across the floor. Once, I swore I heard breathing. Not mine. I started sleeping with the hallway light on, but it didn't help. The shadows just changed shape. I tried telling myself it was an old building. Pipes groaned. Wood settled. Maybe even mice. But then came the voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even clear, but it was definitely human. A whisper, right outside my bedroom door, saying my name. I froze. Every hair on my body lifted. I waited, listened. Nothing. I opened the door slowly, expecting a prank, a drunk neighbor, a dream. But the hallway was empty. The next morning, I checked the lock. Still bolted. The peephole showed the same dark corridor. I told myself maybe I'd said my own name in a dream. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Not after the note. On the 10th day, I found it slipped under my door. A piece of yellowed paper folded twice, with smudged ink that bled around the edges. No envelope, no name, just 4 words. Do you remember me? I stood there for a long time just staring at it, that old fight or flight instinct rising in my chest. I didn't recognize the handwriting, didn't recognize the paper, and yet something about the way the letters curved felt familiar. I threw the note away, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. What was there to remember? Who? I hadn't told anyone where I moved. I hadn't posted it online. It was supposed to be a clean break. That evening, I checked the door. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints. But when I turned around, every drawer in my kitchen was open. I hadn't left them that way. I was sure of it. I closed each one slowly, trying to convince myself I was losing it. Stress, isolation, residual guilt from what happened with Lena. But the moment I closed the last drawer, my phone rang. No caller ID. Just a voicemail when I didn't answer. I played it with shaking hands, static at first. Then a crackling whisper. You left me. I dropped the phone. The message deleted itself before I could replay it. The building didn't feel like an apartment anymore. It felt like a mouth that had started whispering back. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, ridiculous as that sounds. I installed a camera in the living room, motion activated. I stopped leaving my window open. Still, every morning, I woke to the same thing, the balcony door unlocked, the curtain swaying, and the faint scent of burning plastic. One night, desperate for sleep, I downed 2 melatonin pills and finally slipped into a deeper rest. But I dreamt of flames, of smoke seeping through vents, of someone banging on the walls from the inside. I saw a woman in the reflection of the oven door, dark hair, eyes wide with betrayal, reaching toward me. I woke choking, the taste of ash in my mouth. My phone buzzed again. No number, just one word in a text. Why? That was when I stopped pretending it was all in my head. I went to the building manager, an old man who lived in 4A and smelled like boiled cabbage. I asked him if someone had died in 2E. He stared at me too long, then said, "They moved out." I pushed. "The fire. Did anyone die?" He hesitated, said something about rumors. A tenant who disappeared. But he wouldn't say more. Just shook his head and told me to leave the past alone. I didn't. I couldn't. That night, I pulled up news archives, and there it was, 3 years ago, a fire in apartment 2E. Accidental. No casualties reported. But a missing person case had been filed a week later. A woman named Lena Kovacs. Same first name as my ex, but different person. Age 29. Never found. I stared at her photo. The cheekbones. The eyes. There was something hauntingly familiar. Not because I'd seen her before, but because I felt like I'd been her. And that was the first time I let the thought enter my mind. Maybe I hadn't just moved into 2E. Maybe I'd come back. The thought lodged in my brain like a splinter. Painful. Irrational, impossible to ignore. Maybe I'd come back, not just to 2E, but as something or someone I couldn't remember. That idea festered over the following days, quietly growing into an obsession. I stopped eating regularly. I rarely left the apartment. The lines between sleep and wakefulness blurred. Every night, something else happened. I'd find the bathroom mirror fogged up, a message written with a fingertip. "Look harder." Sometimes I'd find my shoes arranged backward at the door, as if someone or something had tried to walk out but got confused. I told myself to get a grip. Rationalize. Logic was the last shield I had left, so I installed more cameras, one in the bedroom, one in the living room, and one facing the hallway. I reviewed the footage obsessively. Most of it showed nothing but static and shadows except once, at 3:17 a.m., the bedroom camera at the closet door creaking open, slowly, like someone was peeking through. No one came out. Nothing moved inside. But the timestamp didn't lie. Neither did the open door I found the next morning. I posted online under a throwaway account, asking if anyone had ever experienced something similar. The responses were half jokes, half horror stories, but one reply stood out. A user named Lena Returns wrote, "You see it because you remember, others don't. No profile picture. No history." I clicked, but the account was already deleted. I should have been terrified, and I was. But another part of me felt strangely drawn to it, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff and wanted to look down. That weekend, I found the trapdoor. It was in the back of the hallway closet, half concealed behind crumbling drywall. At first, I thought it was a broken floorboard until I saw the hinge. I pried it open and found a narrow crawl space beneath the floor, filled with soot, charred wood, and a scent I can only describe as sadness. There were bones, small ones. Not human, maybe a cat. But what made me freeze wasn't the bones. It was the ring, a silver band with a red stone perfectly intact, lying in the ash like it had just been placed there. I picked it up. It was warm. On the inside, scratched faintly into the metal, were the letters E.K. Not Lena. Not me. No one I knew. But the moment I held it, a memory I didn't own surged through me. Flames crawling up the curtains, hands pounding on a locked door, someone crying out from another room. I dropped the ring, stumbled back, slammed the trapdoor shut. And still, I kept the ring. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me already knew this was no longer about ghosts, or hauntings, or hallucinations. This was about identity. And mine was unraveling. The next time I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger. Not because my face had changed, but because I couldn't remember how I used to look. The ring sat on my desk like an eye that never blinked. That night, I slept with it under my pillow. Not sure why. Maybe I thought it would stop the dreams. But they got worse. More vivid. I saw 2E as it was before the fire. Plants on the windowsill, framed paintings, a record player spinning slow jazz. A woman sitting by the window, writing in a notebook. Not Lena. Someone older, wearing gloves. The same gloves as the woman across the hall. I woke drenched in sweat. I opened my window for air, and there, on the balcony railing, sat the notebook from my dream. Damp, slightly burnt, but real. I flipped through it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was rushed, spidery. Pages were missing. Others soaked in water damage. But what I could read chilled me. He's forgetting again. Every time he comes back, he starts fresh. But it's still him. I see it in the way he looks at the fire escape. He's remembering me in pieces. Another entry. They won't believe me. They said no body was found, but that's because he buried me under himself. My breath caught. The next line. If you're reading this, I forgive you. But please, don't burn it again. I dropped the notebook. The edges had started to smoke. I doused it with water, and it hissed like something alive. After that, things spiraled. The hallway outside 20E darkened earlier than the rest of the building, like the lights were avoiding it. My reflection began lagging, like a glitch in reality. And the woman across the hall, she started leaving packages at my door, small boxes wrapped in black ribbon, no return address. Inside the first was a roll of old film. Inside the second, a cracked porcelain doll with no eyes. I knocked on her door. No answer. I knocked again. The door creaked open on its own, revealing an empty room filled with nothing but mirrors. Every one of them faced inward, reflecting infinite versions of me. I stumbled back. Her voice echoed from nowhere. Not yet. I ran back to 2E, locked the door, pushed a chair under the handle. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I started researching memory disorders, reincarnation, trauma loops. Anything that could explain why I felt like I had lived this before. And slowly, I built a theory. Wild, maybe. But it made sense. What if I wasn't just haunted by someone else's past? What if I was reliving my own, not metaphorically, literally, a loop, a punishment, a story repeating itself over and over until I got it right? But I didn't know what right meant. Saving someone, remembering something, or maybe accepting guilt. I started reading the notebook again. Every line now felt like it was addressed to me. You weren't always cruel, but when the smoke filled the room, you chose silence. That was the beginning of the end. I couldn't take it anymore. I smashed the ring with a hammer. It didn't break. I tossed it into the drain. It reappeared on my nightstand. I burned the notebook. The ashes spelled out my name on the floor. I finally went to the police. Told them everything. They nodded politely. Took notes. Promised to look into it. I could tell they didn't believe me. But one officer paused, looked me in the eye, and said, "You know, you're not the first to complain about 20E. The last guy, he claimed it was talking to him. Said he used to be someone else. Then he jumped. From the balcony." I asked. The officer hesitated. "No. From the inside." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. When I got back, I found the walls of my apartment covered in writing. My handwriting. I hadn't done it. Not consciously. But it was mine. All of it. Lines like, "Don't trust the mirrors. The fire wasn't the end. You have to go deeper." The final message, right over the headboard, was different. "You are 2E." I stared at it for hours as if it would explain everything, but it only made the walls feel smaller. The apartment no longer felt like 4 rooms. It felt like a mind I was trapped inside. My own. Someone else's. That's when I decided to confront her. The woman with the gloves. I waited until dusk, when the hall was quiet and her door finally creaked open. But she wasn't there, only a mirror, one large enough to step through. And my reflection. Except it wasn't me. It was the man from my dreams. Older. Colder. Wearing the same ring. And he smiled. That's when I finally understood. I hadn't come back to 2E. I'd never left. The moment I realized I had never left 2E, something shifted. Not outside, but inside me. Like a film reel skipping backward, memories not my own, yet intimately familiar, began playing in flashes. Not dreams. Not visions. Something heavier, as if the air itself thickened with each frame of truth. I was in a kitchen. This kitchen, leaning against the counter while a woman I now knew was named Eliza stirred tea. Her laugh, soft and tired, carried a sadness I hadn't understood then. I watched her from across the room, admiring the way the sunlight caught the curve of her jaw. But beneath that affection was a chill, the kind that precedes betrayal. The next memory slammed into me like a blow to the chest. A fight. Shouting. Words that fractured like glass. I saw myself. I mean him, the man in the mirror. Pacing with wild eyes while Eliza backed away, hands trembling, the ring already off her finger. "You think I don't know what you've done?" she said, voice breaking. And then flames. Sudden, ravenous. Not an accident. Not entirely. My knees buckled under the weight of what I now believed. I didn't just live here. I was the reason this place was cursed. It wasn't just haunted by memories. It was the memory. And I was its echo. The apartment didn't need tenants. It needed witnesses. It needed me to remember. The next day, the walls began bleeding. Not actual blood, but a dark, oily substance that dripped from the corners like ink from a pen out of control. The writing returned, this time not in my hand, but Eliza's. Her sharp loops and delicate slants ran along the ceiling, the floors, the mirror frames. "You can't hide in yourself forever. You are the storm you tried to survive. When the fire came, you locked the door." I screamed, tore down curtains, broke every mirror. But her words remained like the apartment itself was reciting them. I fled to the hallway, gasping, pounding on doors, begging the others to help, to see. No one opened, but I heard them inside, breathing, whispering, listening. Trapped, I sat in the stairwell until sunrise, too afraid to return. But the moment I crossed the threshold of 2E again, the air welcomed me. That was the worst part. How familiar it all felt, like guilt settling into a favorite coat. I called my sister, told her everything. She thought I was having a breakdown, told me to see someone. I wanted to argue, to scream that this wasn't delusion. But how could I explain it to anyone who hadn't lived it? So I tried something different. I started to journal, documenting every whisper, every shift, every bleeding wall and static message. I taped the entries to the walls. In doing so, I noticed something I hadn't before: patterns, dates, phrases that repeated every third day, room temperatures that dropped by exactly 3 degrees, scratches on the floor that curved like script. It was choreographed, a ritual. The apartment was performing a cycle, and I was both actor and audience. On the 13th night, I followed the scratching, crawled on hands and knees from the living room to the hallway closet. The trapdoor again. Only this time I heard her, Elisa, singing a lullaby I didn't know the words to, but which filled me with unbearable sorrow. I opened the trapdoor. Beneath it, the crawl space had changed, no longer filled with soot or decay. It was clean, candlelit. A table stood at the center, and upon it lay a box, small, wrapped in fabric burned at the corners. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me. Every one began the same: to the man I once loved, and they got darker from there. Not angry, never angry, but tired. Elisa wrote of the way I changed, how obsession bled into paranoia, how love curdled into control. She begged me to see her, to believe her, to stop. The final letter was shorter than the rest. Stayed until the end. I stayed through the smoke. I stayed through the silence. But when the door wouldn't open, I knew. You chose yourself. And now you're here, again, as always, until you choose different. I wept. I pressed the paper to my chest and wept harder than I had since childhood. I thought that was the moment of redemption, that facing the truth would free me. But the moment I climbed out of the crawl space, the apartment was gone. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean physically. The floors turned to ash beneath my feet. The walls faded into mist, and I was standing in a black void, holding only the box. A voice surrounded me. Not Elisa's this time. Mine. A dozen versions of it. Fractured. You don't change by remembering, they said in unison. You change by choosing. Then came the mirrors. Hundreds suspended in the void like shards of time. Each one showing a version of me, some older, some younger, some laughing, some screaming. In one I was dancing with Elisa. In another, I was locking the door while flames consumed the room behind me. And in the last, I was sitting in an empty apartment, whispering her name like a prayer. A path appeared beneath my feet, not made of wood or stone, but of decisions. Every step, a choice I hadn't made. Every turn, a fork I avoided. I walked for hours, or maybe seconds. Time didn't work the same there, until I reached a door. Familiar, painted like the one to Tune E. I opened it, found myself back in the apartment, but different. The air no longer tasted like smoke. The ring was gone, the mirrors were clean, and the woman across the hall. She stood at my threshold, gloves off. Her hands were covered in scars. She handed me an envelope. It's time, she said. Inside was a key. Not to the apartment, to her apartment. I stepped inside for the first time. The walls were covered in photos. Of me. Not just recent ones. Ones from years I couldn't account for. Ones of me in other apartments, other cities, always standing beside her. Elisa, and the woman across the hall. She was her mother. The realization crashed over me like a wave. She had been watching me through lifetimes, through replays, waiting for me to finally see. She led me to the back room. Inside was a fireproof box. She unlocked it, handed me a single tape. Labeled, "Your Last Chance." I watched it on an old TV. Grainy footage of Meek, truly Meek, confessing to the camera. I loved her, I said, voice hoarse. But I couldn't handle the idea that she might leave. So I made sure she couldn't. The tape cut out. The screen went black, and then a question appeared on it, typed in blinking green. Will you let her go this time? I stared at it. Hours passed, then I whispered, yes. The apartment began to dissolve around me. I felt it in my chest first. A lightness. Then the walls turned translucent. The floor peeled back into mist, and I saw her, Elisa, smiling, not sad, not afraid, just free. She mouthed the words, thank you, and vanished. I woke up in a hospital, the real kind. White walls, machines, tubes in my arms. A nurse told me I'd been in a coma after a fire in my apartment. They said I had no burns, but I'd been unresponsive for weeks. The building had been condemned. I asked about 2E. She frowned. There was no 2D, she said. The numbers skipped from 1D to 3A. Always have. But I knew better, because even now I sometimes wake up at 3:17 a.m., heart racing, sure I can still hear the lullaby. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see the ring. Still warm. Still waiting. They said trauma can rewrite the brain, overwrite reality until what you remember and what truly happened become tangled beyond repair. But what I lived, or dreamt, or relived, inside 2E wasn't just trauma. It was architecture, a structure built from guilt, memory, and repetition, looping endlessly until I broke through by surrendering. Or so I believed. After the hospital released me, I moved in with my cousin on the other side of town. Bland suburbia. Identical houses. No iron balconies. No whispers in vents. I told myself I'd start over again. No haunted apartments. No Eliza. No a 2E. For a few weeks it worked. I jogged. I cooked. I smiled at strangers. I even started therapy. Told Dart Henley that I had vivid dreams, a past I couldn't shake. She asked if I wanted to confront it. I lied and said I already had. But the past doesn't need doors to enter. It finds you in the silence between breaths. One night I opened a drawer looking for a pen and found the ring. The same silver band with the red stone unburned, untouched. I stared at it, willing it to vanish. It didn't. I locked it in a box, buried it in the backyard. The next morning it was on my nightstand. I asked my cousin if she'd seen anything strange. She laughed. You mean besides you sleepwalking and rearranging the hallway chairs into a perfect circle last night? I didn't laugh back. That same night, I heard a knock. Not at the door, but at the window. We lived on the second floor. I pulled the curtain. No one there. Just fog, heavy and low. I left the light on, fell asleep eventually. But when I woke, the word, Agan, was written in dust on the mirror. I wiped it away and didn't tell anyone. Days passed, then weeks. The ring kept reappearing. I started dreaming of keys. Keys with teeth shaped like people's names. Eliza. Henley, even mine. I dreamed of a corridor with infinite doors. All of them labeled 2E. I dreamed of fire alarms that didn't scream but whispered. Of stairwells that spiraled down forever. Then one afternoon the mail came. Among bills and catalogs was a single yellow envelope with no stamp, no return address. Inside a Polaroid, blurry, but undeniably me, standing at the balcony of 2E, flames behind me, smiling. My face distorted, teeth too sharp, eyes too hollow. On the back, did you really choose different? I packed my things that night, told my cousin I needed space. I didn't say from what. I booked a room at an old motel near the city's edge, one of those hourly joints with humming neon and carpet that smells like bleach and rot. It felt safer, in a way. Too transient to be haunted. I unplugged the TV, blocked the mirror with a towel. I kept the lights on, but the moment I closed my eyes, I was back. Not metaphorically. I stood in 2E, barefoot, the scent of jasmine and smoke thick in the air. Eliza stood by the window, wearing the same dress from the photo. She didn't look at me, just whispered, "You still don't see." I ran to her, grabbed her arm. I said I was sorry. I choked. "I let you go. What else do you want from me?" She turned. Her eyes were black voids. Her skin cracked like porcelain, glowing with faint embers underneath. "You can't let go of what you are," she said. "And you're still choosing you." I woke gasping. The motel room was unchanged, except the towel had fallen from the mirror. My reflection stared back, except it wasn't me. Not quite. A shadow clung to my shoulders, and behind my eyes flickered firelight. I smashed the mirror. Checked out within the hour, but I couldn't go back to my cousin. I didn't want to explain why ash kept appearing in my shoes, or why my pillow smelled like burning pages. So I drifted. From place to place. Hostels. Couchsurfing. Sleeping in my car. Everywhere I went, it followed. Notes under windshield wipers. Photos slipped into my jacket pocket. Once even an audio file emailed to me from an untraceable account. Static. Then Eliza's voice saying, "Start again. This time, see me." I finally gave in and returned to the old building, or where it used to be. The lot was now fenced off, flattened. A construction sign said, "Future site of luxury apartments." But I walked the perimeter anyway, until I found a crack in the fence and slipped through. At the center of the lot, buried under gravel, I found it. The door to 2E, just the door. Standing upright, frame intact, burned edges curling inward like it had been torn from the timeline and pinned here. I approached, hands shaking. On the wood, the same 4 words from that first note. "Do you remember me?" I did. But it wasn't enough. I opened the door. On the other side was not earth, not rubble, but the apartment. Whole, restored, as it had been before the fire. I stepped through. I knew I shouldn't. But some doors don't care what we want. Inside, everything was perfect. Clean walls. Music playing. The scent of tea and oranges. Eliza stood in the kitchen back to me. "You're early this time," she said, as if we'd been rehearsing this moment forever. I swallowed. "I chose different. I left. I remembered." She shook her head. "You chose regret. That's not the same as change." "Then what do I do?" I whispered. She finally turned, and this time her eyes were hers, soft, tired, human. "Stay until the end. Not to win, not to escape, just to witness." The room began to darken. The floor shuddered. I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Around us, fire returned, but slower now, like it too was remembering something. The flames didn't burn. They revealed. Layers of the apartment peeled back. Beneath wallpaper, messages etched in stone. Beneath floorboards, photographs. Beneath photographs, truths. I saw the night I locked the door. I saw her screaming, not in anger, but in fear. I saw myself frozen, not by cruelty, but cowardice. The guilt that followed had become my only identity. The apartment had become my penance, and the loop my sanctuary. I kept reliving it to punish myself. I realized. Eliza nodded. "And you kept returning because part of you believed punishment was love." We stood as the fire consumed everything, but we didn't burn. We watched. Together. Then she leaned close and whispered, "When you wake up, don't forget. Don't bury me in your guilt. Bury me in peace." I closed my eyes, this time not to escape, but to listen. When I opened them again, I was lying on a bench outside the fenced lot. Morning sun warmed my face. The construction site buzzed with machinery. There was no door, no smoke, just a single photograph in my lap. Eliza smiling, free. On the back, in her handwriting, "Thank you. Now live something new." I held it close. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift, not disappear, but soften. Guilt had anchored me to the past, but now memory could be a bridge, not a loop. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I carried the photograph with me everywhere after that morning, tucked into my wallet like a talisman or confession. Eliza's smile was real in that image, unposed, as if she had finally stepped out of the shadows of my guilt. And maybe she had. Maybe we both had. For a while, I tried to live normally again, not in the way people often describe healing, as a straight line or clean break, but in loops that were mine, not the apartment's. I woke each day uncertain but willing. I walked. Cooked my meals. Listened to wind chimes instead of fire alarms. My therapist, Dr. Henley, said that what I experienced in 2E, what I remembered, was likely the mind's way of building a mythology around trauma. That I needed that structure because the raw truth was too fragmented. I nodded when she said this. I even believed her, a little. But deep down I knew something more complex had happened. Not supernatural, necessarily, but not ordinary either. I hadn't imagined the messages, or the ring reappearing, or Eliza's voice in the static. These things didn't just happen to me. They belonged to me, woven into my narrative like stitches in scar tissue. And then one day, as I passed a small bookstore on the outskirts of the city, I saw it. A title in the window display, Rooms That Remember. A strange name. It sounded more like a poem than a novel. The author's name was unfamiliar, M.E. Kovacs. The name clutched something in my stomach before I realized why. Kovacs, Eliza's surname. I went inside, barely breathing, and asked the cashier if I could take a look. The book was slim, a novel, or a memoir, or both. The back cover simply said, "Some places hold more than memories. They hold decisions we never made." I bought it without thinking, rushed home, and when I opened the book, the dedication page hit me like a thunderclap. To the man who kept returning, until he finally stayed. The chapters weren't numbered, just titled, Dulgar, Ash, Again, Ring, Balcony. Each chapter mirrored events from 2E, but the voice wasn't mine, it was hers, Eliza's. She described her fear, her helplessness, her love too, the way she tried to forgive me even as the smoke thickened. She wrote of watching me rot inside my guilt, how even after the fire I kept building rooms of memory around her. And how, finally, I saw her, truly saw her. The final chapter ended not with death or vengeance, but with release. He let go not of me, but of the version he built to hate himself. And in that letting go, I was free to leave the story. My hands shook as I closed the book. I didn't know how she'd written it, whether it was real, symbolic, or some echo from another loop. But I knew she had found a way to leave the apartment behind. And now she was giving me the chance to do the same. I started writing letters I never intended to send. To Eliza, to myself, to the man I had been. I wrote them on napkins, receipts, pages torn from the book. Sometimes I burned them. Sometimes I buried them. Each one made the air around me a little lighter. But the apartment was not finished with me. Not completely. One night, I dreamed of a hallway made of reflections. Mirrors lining both sides, but none showing me. Instead, I saw people I didn't recognize: a boy crying in a closet, a woman holding a cracked photo frame, an old man setting a room on fire and locking the door from the outside. As I walked, each figure placed a hand against the mirror. Some pleaded. Some smiled. Some blood. At the end of the hallway stood another door, not 2E, just a plain, wooden slab. But behind it, I felt a pressure like thousands of stories pressing against it. Waiting, I woke up gasping. My bedroom was filled with static. My phone, my TV, even the old radio I'd never turned on. A voice cut through. "They're still trapped. You know the way out." I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. Couldn't. My reflection lagged again. My shadow moved before I did. I saw door frames where there weren't any, and in the corner of my eye always a flicker of orange light. The fire hadn't ended. It had spread. Not flames. Stories. I understood then that 2E wasn't unique. It was a template. A model of what happens when truth is buried, when memory loops instead of lives. I returned to therapy. Not to explain what was happening, but to stay grounded. Dr. Hinley said, "You talk about this place like it's alive." I said, "Is. But it's tired, and I think I might be the last one who remembers how to put it to sleep." She looked at me like I was unraveling. Maybe I was. But I also felt clearer than I ever had. One afternoon, I returned to the bookstore. The novel was gone from the shelves. I asked the cashier, but she said no book by that title had ever been in stock, no author by that name either. I checked my own copy, still in my bag, but the pages were blank, every one. I flipped through again. At the very end, a note had appeared in looping handwriting, not for display, for remembrance. Pass it on. So I did. I began finding others, people like me. I searched online forums for keywords: memory, apartment, loop, fire 317. I met a man in Boston who said his basement whispered in his mother's voice. A woman in Prague who swore her kitchen radio played news from days that hadn't happened yet. A boy in Kiev who dreamt of the same room every night, though he had never been there. All of them stuck. All of them looped. I told them my story, about 2E, about Elisa, about staying until the end, not running, not redeeming, just witlessing. Some others weren't ready, but one by one, I started giving them copies of the book. Blank, untitled, with nothing but the dedication to the one who kept returning until you stayed. I don't know who printed them. Maybe no one. Maybe the place itself. Maybe we all carried it within us, but something was changing. Each time I told the story, I felt lighter, not emptier, just less bound. The apartment visits grew fewer. The ring stopped returning. My reflection caught up. And yet I knew it wasn't over. Not fully. Some loops close with a whisper, others with a door, and mine, it would end with a choice. One night, I woke to find my bedroom door slightly ajar, no wind, no drafts, just open. On the floor beside it the key, the original, cold, heavy, marked with the initials EK. I picked it up. No fear this time, only clarity. I slipped it into my pocket, dressed, and left, not to return to the building, but to where it had all started. The coordinates had changed. The world had shifted, but the architecture, the idea, remained. I followed instinct, crossed 5 cities, ended up in a village I had no name for, standing before a red brick house that wasn't 2E, but might as well have been. The door opened when I approached. No one inside, just mirrors, and a single voice. "You're not here to break the loop. You're here to guide the next one through it." I stepped in. The house sealed behind me. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I sat in the center of the floor and waited. Somewhere, someone was dreaming of a fire, of a voice calling through smoke, of a door that wouldn't open, and when they reached that moment, I would be there. Not to save them, not to punish them, but to witness. Because the cycle doesn't end with escape. It ends when we learn to carry the memory without turning it into a prison. When we remember not what we lost, but how we came back. Again. And again. Until we choose to stay. The house was silent. Not with the hush of emptiness, but with a stillness that felt chosen, like everything inside had agreed to wait. I stood in the center room, the air dense but breathable, watching the light shift on the floorboards, casting long shadows in the shape of things that had not yet happened. There were no ghosts here, no smoke, no Elisa. Only the key in my pocket and the sense that something was listening patiently. This house, though new to me, had the same weight as 2E, the same hush behind the walls, the same memory-drenched air. I didn't recognize the furniture, but I knew its arrangement. A couch angled just slightly too far from the window, a mirror above a mantel with a crack that split your reflection into timelines. Even the silence was familiar, as though it had been imported directly from my own thoughts. And in the corner of the room, just barely visible against the molding, a doorframe drawn in charcoal. Faint but purposeful. I approached, touching the smudged lines with my fingertips, and felt warmth radiate through the wall. Not heat. Presence. I pressed my ear to the surface. Nothing. But when I pulled away, a word had appeared on the wood. Ready. No more riddles. No more loops. I exhaled and whispered, Wes. The lights in the house dimmed. The floor beneath me softened, like breath on glass. The ceiling dissolved into sky. Not black, not blue. A kind of warm gray like the moment between sleep and wake. And in front of me, the charcoal doorframe opened into a corridor, long, curving, infinite. Mirrors lined both walls again, but this time they didn't reflect me. They reflected others, not strangers, not anymore. People I had met. Online, in dreams, in silence. The man in Boston with the mother's voice in the basement. The girl in Prague with the backwards time. The boy in Kiev with the recurring room. Each mirror flickered as they passed through their own loops, faltered, returned, broke down, and rebuilt. And behind each one a fire burned. Not consuming, not punishing. Illuminating. I kept walking. My footsteps made no sound. At the end of the corridor stood a door identical to the one I found at the construction lot. The burned frame, the scorched handle, the unmistakable aura of 2E. But above it, something new had been etched in careful strokes. This time, remember to leave it open. My hand hovered over the knob, not in fear, not even in hesitation, in reverence. This was the moment all others had led me to. Not escape, not salvation, but presence. I turned the knob. Inside was 2E, but stripped down to its barest bones. No furniture, no photographs, no voices. Just light, streaming in from impossible angles, crisscrossing the dust like golden thread. I stepped in and closed the door. But not all the way. A crack remained, the first time I'd ever done that. I walked slowly through each room. The floorboards no longer groaned. The walls no longer whispered. There were no hidden messages, no ring, no ash. Just silence and peace. I found myself standing where Eliza once stood, by the window, the wind nudging the curtains like a gentle reminder. I didn't cry, not this time. I just stood there, remembering without clinging, grieving without drowning. I stayed until the light shifted and the room grew dim, then sat on the floor with my back against the wall. That's when the first knock came. Soft, uncertain, from the hallway. I didn't move at first. Then another knock. I stood and approached the door. On the other side stood a man, young, wide-eyed, holding a key and shaking hands. He looked lost, familiar, like someone I once were, or might be again. Is this D? He asked. His voice cracked on the question. I nodded. It's a place you already know. But yes, it's also that. He held up the key, eyes pleading. I keep waking up here. That's what we all say, I replied gently. But waking up isn't the same as remembering, and remembering isn't the same as staying. What am I supposed to do? I stepped aside, left the door open. Come in, sit, watch, and when the room changes, don't run. Witness it. He stepped in, slowly, cautiously. I could see his fear, not of me, but of himself. That was the true haunting, the unspoken truth no mirror ever fully showed. And yet he crossed the threshold, just like I once did. As he wandered the space, I sat quietly, no longer needing to explain. This was not a place for answers. It was a place for endurance, for acknowledgement, for breaking patterns by letting them play out without interruption. Another knock came 2 days later. A woman this time, holding a notebook, pages fluttering with ink that shimmered and vanished. I thought I imagined it, she said, until the dreams came back. You didn't imagine it, I told her. You built it. And now it's asking to be seen. I let her in, too. The apartment expanded as more arrived, not in size, but in meaning. Each room became a stage for someone's unspoken pain, a failed apology, a forgotten scream, a locked door with no handle, and each visitor brought their own version of Elisa. Of guilt, of memory. The fire returned, but it no longer consumed. It illuminated each memory until it surrendered its teeth. We began to gather in the evenings, not to talk, just to bay. Watching the light shift, listening to the creaks that now spoke in gentler tones. Sometimes we lit candles, not in ritual, but in reverence for the selves we left behind. I never led them. I wasn't a guide. I was simply the first who had stayed long enough to open the door, and that was enough. Years passed, or maybe days, time folded inward. Then, one morning, I awoke alone again. The apartment was silent, not expectant, complete. I walked through the rooms. No marks, no photographs, just sun on the walls and the scent of cool air. A final note rested on the floor where the front door once had been. In Eliza's writing, "You're ready now, not to forget, but to live forward." I smiled, folded the paper, tucked it into my shirt. When I stepped outside, the street was unfamiliar. Bright, unburdened. I didn't look back. There was no door to close, no key to turn, Only the certainty that somewhere, someone else would hear the knock. That someone else would walk the corridor of mirrors, stand at the edge of their story and choose. Not to flee it, but to stay until it shifted under their weight. And when that happens, I'll be there. Not in person, not in voice, but in presence. In the thread of stories that whisper, you are not alone. The door opens when you're ready. And the fire only burns what no longer belongs. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.